Pompeii is sometimes described as being a place frozen in time. In short, the eruption captured the city, and so what we see today is exactly how it was. Well, that's probably not the case, and here's why. I'll start with body count. Estimates of Pompeii's population vary, but with only a third of it left to excavate, we're not seeing the numbers of bodies we'd expect if everyone was caught out that day. The suggestion is that many escaped, and if so, they would have taken their goods and possessions with them, which means that a lot of contextual evidence is lost. For example, you excavate a room. Did it really look like that? Or was there more stuff that was taken away? And then there was the looting, not just in the modern period, but there's plenty of evidence that folk came back and tunnelled down into Pompeii. One room even had "room tunnelled through" scratched by the door, and a collapsed tunnel was found with skeletons next to digging equipment. This may have occurred shortly after Pompeii was buried, perhaps by families returning to the site of the devastation, or in the centuries after. We're not exactly sure, but what we don't have at Pompeii is exactly that idea of a city set in amber, which is sometimes the impression given. When Vesuvius erupted, the initial effect was that a lot of pumice fell on Pompeii. This chart shows the different layers of debris which fell on Pompeii, and you can see that the early part was all pumice, and it formed around 2.8 meters. If you can imagine what it must have been like at that point, it was getting dark. What was going on generally must have been terrifying and confusing, and you've got pumice falling around you. So for many people, the logical thing to do was stay indoors, get inside somewhere. But that, unfortunately, was going to be the end for some of them. The problem here is that individual bits of pumice aren't going to do much to you. But it was falling at 15 centimetres an hour, that's around 6 inches. And within 6 hours, it had accumulated enough on roofs for them to start to collapse. Around 1,044 bodies have been recovered at Pompeii, and 394 of them have been recovered from this layer of debris. Of those, 345 were found indoors, often amongst the rubble which had presumably killed them, and sometimes their skeletons were displaying the classic kind of injuries you'd expect in that situation. And there's one final gruesome detail to all of this. The pumice wasn't cold, and there's a suggestion that it would have heated the roofs to around 250 to 280 degrees Fahrenheit before they started to collapse. So what fell on you would have been a superheated mass of rubble. If it didn't kill you, it was going to cook you. Ever wondered just how high the eruption column from Vesuvius was? Good. Estimates have it at reaching 31 kilometres. It's around 19 miles. That was way higher than the altitude a commercial airliner flies at. The main killer at Pompeii were the pyroclastic flows. Here's a bit about them. A pyroclastic flow is an avalanche of superheated gas and rock. Vesuvius generated 6 of these. They were caused when the column firing up from the volcano started to destabilise around 12 hours after the initial eruption. So we're talking early hours of the following morning. First missed Pompeii, but it hit Herculaneum. From work done on the remains there, it's estimated that the temperature was around 500 degrees. Anyone in the open would have been killed instantly. And there's a bit of debate about how those who were sheltered died. There was a famous discovery of bodies, skeletons, as you can see, in the boathouses. People were waiting to be rescued. Some have argued that they were able to stay alive just about, but would have died from asphyxiation, or perhaps the heat killed them. The following 2 pyroclastic flows also missed Pompeii, but the 4th, arriving just before dawn, really hit Pompeii hard. This one was travelling at between 60 and 100 miles an hour. And it was cooler than the one at Herculaneum. It was only 250 degrees to 300 degrees Celsius. Still hot by anyone's standard, and anyone in the open would have been killed more or less instantly. And there was a lot of open. Just remember, all that pumice fall caused the collapse of buildings. People out in the open now, there wasn't as much cover. The majority of the casts found at Pompeii belong to this pyroclastic flow and the subsequent pyroclastic flows that happened. There were 2 more after that. You've probably seen this pose in a number of the victims of Pompeii. Their arms sort of bent out in front of them, and likewise their legs also bent, not all the time but often. There's been quite a lot of speculation as to why this is. Take this one, for example. This is quite a famous one. I won't go into the details too much, but let's just say that there was quite a lot of interest as to what he was up to. A study in 2010 argued that this was evidence of the pugilistic pose, or pugilistic attitude. When a body is exposed to high temperatures, it can cause the muscles to shorten and stiffen. The arms out in front with hands clenched make it look like a boxer, hence the term pugilistic. These are examples of the pugilistic attitude. You can see it in the victim of Pompeii, which is the one at the top, but also at one at the bottom, and that's from a more recent eruption. You may be wondering, what caused that rise in temperature? Well, the answer is pyroclastic flows, and these occurred at Pompeii. A pyroclastic flow is effectively an avalanche of superheated gas and rock, and it rolled over Pompeii. In fact, there was more than one of them, and I'll get into those on a separate video.